Hello and welcome to Pitboards and Podiums with me, Maya Westwick. In today's episode, we are going to be talking about Sir Lewis Hamilton, so buckle up, this could be a long one, so get cozy and let's start talking F1. Alright guys, so as I said, I am going to be talking about Sir Lewis Hamilton today. This is the first in my series for this season of talking about all of the drivers. So I thought, who better to start with than Sir Lewis Hamilton, especially considering this is going up on the 7th of January, which is his birthday. How lovely! I promise not every episode is going to be on someone's birthday. I just thought for the first few, why not make it special, you know? So, as I've said, Sir Lewis Hamilton was born on the 7th of January. He was born in 1985, making him 39 years old today. He is a Capricorn. There's a bit of a theme here because all of the people that I'm speaking about at the moment, you know, Michael Schumacher, the next episode's about Toto Wolff, all their birthdays are within a week of each other. That's why. Is it any surprise that the two greatest drivers in Formula One history are both Capricorns, both goats? Anyway, we're not going to talk about that right now. We're going to talk about Sir Lewis Hamilton, what led him to Formula One, the career that he's had, and everything that he's kind of been, not everything, but a lot of what he's been up to outside of Formula One as well. So that's why this could be a long one. So Sir Lewis Hamilton was born in Stevenage. His brother is Nicholas Hamilton, who is also a racing driver. Nicholas currently is competing in the British Touring Car Championship in a specially modified car due to his cerebral palsy, and he is actually the first disabled driver to race in that series. So both of the Hamilton brothers are really breaking boundaries in their respective careers, which is absolutely amazing to see. As I've already said multiple times, Sir Lewis Hamilton is a Sir. He was knighted in the 2021 New Year's Honours List. He also already had an MBE, that was from 2009, so after he'd won his first championship in 2008, and he also has an honorary fellowship of the Royal Academy of Engineering in kind of recognition of all of his achievements in motorsport. He's also very notable outside of Formula One for just his general celebrity high-profile lifestyle, for his environmental and social activism, and for his involvement in music and fashion. He makes a lot of music that has never seen the light of day as to this point, but he does actually have one released song with Christina Aguilera under the pseudonym XNDA. So if you haven't heard of that before, if you search on Spotify or whatever platform you're on that also has music, if you're on one of those, if you search for XNDA, then you will find some of Lewis Hamilton's music, which is pretty cool because we love drivers that have hobbies. And of course, he's also known for being very out there and very fashionable. He obviously has gone to the Met Gala a lot of times, and he just makes the paddock his runway, which I love. Why shouldn't the paddock be a fashion event, you know? I love it. He's also very much credited with furthering Formula One's global following, because a lot of people, even if they don't follow Formula One, will know who Sir Lewis Hamilton is. He is very, very high profile, and a lot of the time people come into the sport, especially in that kind of celebrity world, they'll come into the sport in support of him and then they'll stay for the actual racing, which is quite nice. He's also a very prominent advocate for activism combating racism, and he pushes to increase diversity within motorsport through organisations such as the charitable organisation that he set up in 2021, Mission 44. Currently, he races for the Mercedes-AMG Petronas Formula One team. He has done since 2013, and before then he raced with McLaren from his debut in 2007 up to the end of the 2012 season. He joined the McLaren Young Driver Programme back in 1988 after impressing Ron Dennis, who was at the time the CEO of McLaren, and he is the first black and the first mixed race driver in Formula One. He's not the first black driver to have ever driven a Formula One car. That honour goes to Willie Ribbs. He got to test a car decades and decades and decades ago, but he never got to actually race in Formula One, and to this date, Lewis is the only black driver, as well as the first black driver, to have ever competed in the series, which obviously is something that needs to change, and it's something that Lewis is pushing for it to change. So it would be very interesting to see if he manages that, and how long it will be until we get more representation within Formula One, with there only being 20 drivers, only 20 cars on the grid. It's very easy for there to not be any representation within the sport. So Lewis's journey with racing started when he was very, very young. Before he even raced himself, as in like him driving a car, he raced the little radio controlled cars, and he still loves those to this day. I know him and Esteban Ocon have raced each other doing that before, all of that sort of thing. But his first go-kart was actually a present from his dad for Christmas when he was 6 years old. And his dad basically promised to support his racing career as long as he worked hard in school. And to do so, Anthony Hamilton, incredible man, he took redundancy from his job as an IT manager and became a contractor, sometimes working up to 4 jobs at a time to support Lewis through his racing series, and also taking Lewis to all of these different racing series as well. So a lot of Anthony Hamilton's time was dedicated to cultivating the talent that was inside of Lewis. Throughout his childhood and his junior racing career, he did struggle against racist abuse, because he was very often the only black child there, or one of the only black children there, and he did take up karate at the age of 5 to defend himself because he was being bullied at school. So it's something that throughout his life he has had to deal with. It's not something that he should have had to deal with, but it's the very sad reality that he has, and it has made him an incredibly resilient person. But he is also incredibly respectful, and he shows a lot of respect to people who a lot of people wouldn't, if they were treated the way that those people have treated Lewis. And I think that just shows his strength of character, to be quite honest. So going through his journey to Formula One, basically, in 1993, at the age of 8, he began competitive karting, and he quickly began winning the races and the cadet class championships. And then by 1995, at the age of 10, he became the youngest driver to win the British Cadet Karting Championship. He then was invited to the Autosport Awards that year, and he approached Ron Dennis at the age of 10, so the McLaren F1 team boss, CEO, all of that business. He approached him for an autograph, and he told him that he wanted to race his cars. He said to him that he wanted to race for McLaren, to which Dennis replied, he wrote into Lewis's autograph book, "Phone me in 9 years and we'll sort something out then." So this is when he's 10 that he's done this. So obviously Dennis is saying, come back when you're 19. Then 3 years later, in 1998, at the age of 13, Ron Dennis called Lewis Hamilton following his second Super 1 Series and British Championship wins to offer him a role in the McLaren driver development programme. This contract included the option of a future Formula One seat, making him the youngest driver to secure a contract that later resulted in a Formula One drive, because this contract was signed when he was 13 years old. In 2000, he then became the European champion with maximum points in Formula A. At this time, he was teammates with Nico Rosberg for the first time, and he was made a rising star member of the British Racing Drivers Club. In 2001, he then competed in Formula Super A, again teammating Nico Rosberg, and they quickly became very, very close friends. They would go on holiday together, even though they came from completely 2 different worlds. Obviously, Lewis came from a council estate in Stevenage. Nico came from his dad being a Formula One driver. 2 completely different worlds, but they became very, very fast friends, and they would go on holiday together, and they dreamt of getting to Formula One together. Also in 2001, they competed against Michael Schumacher in Schumacher's one-off return to karts, and Lewis ended up finishing in 7th, just 4 places behind Schumacher himself. And then in 2004, that was the first time that Lewis test drove a McLaren Formula One car. He did that at Silverstone towards the end of 2004. And then in 2006, he won the GP2 championship on his first go. GP2 is now the equivalent of Formula 2, because that's just how the junior series have changed. So winning GP2 in his first attempt is the same as winning Formula 2 in your first attempt. And then 2007 was his rookie season in Formula 1. So he ended up partnering Fernando Alonso, who at that point was the reigning 2-time world champion at McLaren. And in his rookie season, his debut year in Formula One, he finished the championship in P2, just 1 point behind Kimi Raikkonen, who won the world championship that year. So he had 109 points and Kimi won with 110. Fernando Alonso also had 109 points, but he finished third in the championship on countback because Lewis had more second place positions than Fernando Alonso had over the course of the season, because they had the same amount of wins. They both had 4 wins. The legacy of his rookie season was a little bit muddied by the McLaren and Ferrari espionage scandal, which it led to McLaren being excluded from the Constructors' Championship, but it didn't mean that the drivers' points were taken away in terms of the Drivers' Championship, luckily, because obviously it wasn't Lewis or Fernando that was being a little bit dodgy. And he, in his debut season, achieved 9 consecutive podium finishes, which is more than any other rookie in F1 history. And he also became the youngest runner-up to a world championship until Sebastian Vettel beat that record in 2009. Lewis finished on the podium on his debut race, like the first race of the season. Lewis finished on the podium. He had 12 podiums in total, 4 race wins, as I've already said. And he also scored the most points in a debut season of Formula One. He qualified ahead of Alonso 10 times out of the 17 races, and it was a very tense season between him and Alonso. They were involved in a number of incidents, and there was also allegations of bribery. There was allegations that Alonso was potentially trying to sabotage Lewis's season. It was not a good dynamic between the two of them at all, and by the end of the season, that culminated in Alonso and McLaren mutually terminating their contract in November 2007, while Hamilton, around about the same time, signed a multi-million-pound contract to stay with the team until 2012. The next year, in 2008, Lewis won his first World Drivers' Championship title by just 1 point, becoming the then youngest ever world champion at the age of 23, and he won that at the final race of the year after overtaking Timo Glock for P5 in Brazil in literally the final corners of the last lap of the race. Very, very dramatic. That was also a controversial year. Felipe Massa is currently actually trying to take that to court to get the result overturned because he believes there was some form of dodginess going on there. Because Felipe Massa won that race and he started celebrating thinking that he had won the championship, when in fact Lewis then overtook Timo Glock and then ended up winning the championship by 1 point over Felipe Massa, which obviously isn't very nice for Felipe Massa, but Lewis still won the championship. Massa's just trying to get something there. In that season, Lewis achieved 5 wins and 10 podiums, and it made Hamilton the first British World Drivers' Champion since Damon Hill in 1996. In 2009, it was not as great a season for McLaren. They didn't design a very good car. Lewis later described it as the worst car he'd ever had. That was when he was comparing it to the 2022 Mercedes car, which was awful, so kind of shows you that it wasn't great. But he still achieved 2 wins, 4 poles and 5 podiums that season. In 2010, he went into the final race of the year mathematically still able to win the championship, but he did ultimately finish that season in P4 in the Drivers' Championship. In 2011, this was the first year that Lewis finished below his teammate in the standings. So his teammate at this time was Jenson Button. Jenson finished P2 to Sebastian Vettel, who was the world champion that year, and Lewis only finished in P5 due to a combination of distractions in his personal life and run-ins with FIA officials, after which he vowed that he would be back on form for 2012. Lewis had a very, very off and on relationship with Nicole Scherzinger for a number of years, and it was just one of those times that he got a bit caught up outside of Formula One, in his personal life and in the whole celebrity world, that he wasn't as focused on the sport. But that was just literally like a one-off year, and then he was back on form. In 2012, he finished 4th in the standings, achieving 4 race wins, and announced that he would be replacing the retiring Michael Schumacher at Mercedes in 2013. This decision was met by a lot of surprise by the general public, by pundits, by journalists, all sorts. He appeared on BBC's Top Gear, and Jeremy Clarkson basically asked him what he was thinking. But he did end up finishing the season P4 in the standings with a sole race win at the Hungarian Grand Prix, which he won with a winning margin of over 11 seconds on second place Kimi Räikkönen. He also achieved 5 podium finishes and 5 pole positions. This move to Mercedes also meant that he was once again teammates with his childhood friend Nico Rosberg, and that was the birth of Brosadies, which is a whole thing in its own right that I literally could do a whole episode on, just on the rise and fall of their friendship throughout Formula One. So I'm not going to go too much into that. I will go into it a little bit, but not too much, because this episode's about Lewis, not about him and Nico being friends and then not being friends. 2014 was the start of the turbo hybrid era in Formula One, with a whole change in regulations and the kind of engineering and design of the car. Mercedes were very, 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 very dominant for the turbo hybrid era. They dominated the entire era, and that year they won 16 out of the 19 races, 11 of which were won by Lewis in a season-long battle against Rosberg for the title. New regulations on driver numbers also meant that the drivers were all allowed to choose what number they were going to race under for the rest of their career, where previously it had been whoever had won the World Championship the year before was number 1, their teammate was number 2, and then the order of the Constructors' Championship decided the rest of the cars, like 3, 4, 5, and all of that. Now you can choose your own number. So Lewis chose to race under 44, which was his old karting number. And he also secured his second World Drivers' Championship, which was, of course, his first with Mercedes. In 2015, he announced that he would not be using the number 1 for the season, which was his prerogative to do as the world champion. He could choose to run the number 1 the season after he won the World Championship if he wanted to. Because of him being the world champion, he said, no, I'm gonna be 44, that's my number, thank you very much. That meant that it was the first season since 1994 that there wasn't a number 1 car on the field. That was the season when Alain Prost retired following his final World Drivers' Championship in 1993. And he absolutely dominated the 2015 season. He won 10 races, he finished on the podium a record 17 times, and also he matched his hero Ayrton Senna's 3 world titles when he won the championship that year. He did that with 3 races to spare, and his rivalry with Rosberg was really, really starting to intensify. He also extended his contract with Mercedes for a further 3 years in a contract worth over £100 million. It also, within the contract, allowed him to retain his own image rights and keep his championship-winning cars and trophies, which were not things that were in a standard contract for a Formula One driver at the time. In 2016, he did end up losing this World Championship to Rosberg by 5 points, after which Rosberg immediately retired and never raced in Formula One again. Again, I as I've already said, I could do a whole episode on Brosadies and all of that, but yeah. Rosberg winning that year, the price of that was their friendship, and also Rosberg massively had to neglect his own life and mental health and all of that in order to win that championship, which is why he then just left Formula One and went, okay, I'm a world champion now, I'm done. Lewis that year recorded more pole positions and more wins than any other driver. He got 12 pole positions and 10 wins, but he did lose out by the 5 points due to a succession of poor starts early in the season and a crucial engine blowout in Malaysia. He scored 17 podiums again and ended the season with 380 points. This is after the points system has changed once again, which is why there's such a big disparity between this season and his earlier seasons in Formula One when he was like winning in second with like 109. In 2017, he achieved 9 wins, 11 poles, 7 fastest laps, and 13 podiums out of 20 races. It was a very tense title fight with Sebastian Vettel, who raced for Ferrari, and he took the record for the all-time most pole positions. He wrapped up the title in Mexico with 2 races to spare, and at the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, it was a bit of a flashpoint for him and Vettel. Vettel accused him of brake checking and drove into him in retaliation, earning a penalty. At this point in his career, Lewis and Seb are each other's biggest competition. Of course, Nico Rosberg has retired, so Lewis is now partnered with Valtteri Bottas at Mercedes, and Sebastian Vettel has entered this kind of new resurgence with Ferrari, where he appears to be on top form again, and looks like he could start winning championships again, because he won 4 from 2010 to 2013. And of course, at this point, Lewis is also a 4-time world champion because he won that season. In 2018, there was 21 races, of which Lewis won 11. He had 11 poles, 3 fastest laps, and 17 podiums again. It was billed as fight for 5 because both Lewis and Seb were going into the season with 4 World Drivers' Championships to their names. For the first time in history, there was a battle for 2 drivers to achieve their 5th World Drivers' Championship against each other. It was a very, very close season, but Hamilton's run of 6 wins in 7 races towards the end of the season, along with Seb's season kind of unravelling a little bit with a number of driver and mechanical errors, allowed Lewis to clinch the title in Mexico once again for a 2nd year running, and he also set a new record for the most points scored in a season, which was 408. And then he signed another contract extension with Mercedes for 2 years, worth up to £40 million per year, making him the highest paid F1 driver in history. In 2019, it was a season of 21 races again, and Lewis achieved 11 wins, 5 poles, 6 fastest laps, and 17 podiums. He led the driver standings for the majority of the season, and it was a much more competitive season in terms of more of the field getting involved. So he had to fend off challenges from his teammate Valtteri Bottas, from Red Bull's Max Verstappen, and from Ferrari's Charles Leclerc, in order to secure his 6th World Drivers' Championship at the US Grand Prix, again with 2 races remaining. He finished with 413 points, which was another new all-time points record, and he was 87 points ahead of Valtteri Bottas in P2 by the end of the season. The 2020 season was cut short due to COVID. So it was only 17 races. He won 11 of them. He got 10 poles, 6 fastest laps, and 14 podiums, and he only actually took part in 16 of the races because he did have COVID for one of them, and obviously he wasn't allowed to race. So he won his 7th World Drivers' Championship, equaling Michael Schumacher's record in this shortened season due to COVID. And he also broke Michael Schumacher's record of 91 wins. He did that at the Portuguese Grand Prix. As I said, he missed the Sakir Grand Prix in Bahrain after contracting COVID, which was his first race absence since his debut in 2007. And he won the championship with 3 races to go at the Turkish Grand Prix and ended the season 124 points clear of Valtteri Bottas in P2. It was also a very big year for Lewis in terms of his activism. He spearheaded campaigns for equality and diversity within motorsport and just in society in general. He took the knee ahead of every single Formula One race that year, and tried to encourage as many other drivers to do so as possible by individually visiting them and explaining to them how much it meant to him and why it was important. And a large amount of the grid did join in, some of the grid didn't, and that's their own choice. They were still there for the We Racers One silence that Formula One did before every race. They just stood there instead of kneeling. He called out people who were staying silent in light of what was going on in the world. And he was very vocal. He was very vocal at the start of the year in terms of COVID, when Formula One controversially had to cancel the Australian Grand Prix due to COVID because people within the paddock were testing positive, literally at the Australian Grand Prix. Like, they were there ready to race, and multiple people at McLaren and some of the teams were testing positive. Lewis was asked why in a press conference why he thought it was still going ahead, and he just said cash is king. He was very outspoken the whole of the 2020 season, as he has been every season since, really. He knows that he's built his legacy in Formula One. He knows that he has the platform to say what needs to be said. He wore t-shirts bearing Black Lives Matter slogans and poems about equality, including on the podium, such as one that he wore calling for justice for Breonna Taylor. He was calling for the cops that killed her to be arrested. That actually resulted in new rules being implemented by Formula One that said that the drivers were not allowed to wear anything on the podiums other than their race suits, which must be done up to the top. So they basically said that the drivers weren't allowed to make any sort of statements if they were on the podium. He also garnered a huge amount of support from Sebastian Vettel, who by this point was one of his closest friends in Formula One. Sebastian Vettel also massive advocate for social justice and for the environment, and seeing their friendship blossom, especially after their rivalry, and seeing how much they supported each other in their activism. Beautiful. Absolutely loved it. Moving on to 2021, which was a very, very spicy season. It was a season that had some moments of incredible racing. It also had some moments of ridiculous stewarding decisions, ridiculous moves. It had its controversy from both sides. 2021's a bit of a sore spot in terms of Lewis's legacy in Formula One because, well, I'll get into it. So it was very, very heated between himself and Max Verstappen. They frequently exchanged the lead of the title fight throughout the entire season. There was multiple incidents between them where they would come together and that would leave one or both of them crashed out of the race. The most notable ones being at Silverstone and at Monza. So at Silverstone, they had a very controversial crash at Copse Corner that left Max out of the race. Lewis went on to win that race. Max did crash out of the race and he was taken by helicopter to hospital in Coventry to get checked out from that because it was a 51G crash. It was very, very big. It was not good. The stewards blamed Lewis predominantly for it, although a lot of people argued that it was a racing incident. Equally, people at Red Bull argued that Lewis tried to kill Max. The comments from Red Bull were ridiculous, and Lewis actually received a lot of racist abuse after that race that was encouraged by comments made by Dr. Helmut Marko and by Christian Horner, because they would literally accusing Lewis of trying to kill Max. They were saying that he needed to be banned from Formula One, all sorts. They were not saying nice things at all. And the racist abuse that he received, I mean, he shouldn't be receiving any at all, but the racist abuse that he received was so bad that Mercedes, Formula One and the FIA released a joint statement condemning it because it was that severe. At Monza, Max crashed into Lewis, arguably deliberately, and crashed both of them out of the race. And if it wasn't for the fact that Formula One does have halos on their cars now, Lewis likely would have died. People argue, obviously, of course, you know, if safety in Formula One wasn't as good now as it is, that Max could have died at Silverstone, of course. Any crash, a driver, if the safety wasn't as good, could potentially have died. At Monza, Max literally parked his car on top of Lewis's head and said, that's what you get. It wasn't one of Max's finest moments, and the whole season, there was some very nasty, dirty driving going on. And I'm not saying that Lewis was not at fault. I'm not saying that he was completely blameless for the whole season, but predominantly the dirty driving was coming from Max. I'm going to say that. There was also some controversial stewarding decisions. For example, in Jeddah, Max brake tested Lewis, didn't really get any repercussions for it. At Brazil, he completely ran him off the road, again, didn't get any repercussions for it. And then, of course, the biggest one, at Abu Dhabi, the whole Michael Massey controversy. And there was also some loopholes in regulations that were changed for later events but still benefited Max at the time for that season. For example, with Spa, the race at Spa that year was called off due to the rain, but what they did so that they didn't have to refund people was they made everyone wait like 3 hours. They did 3 laps behind the safety car. At no point could anybody race, at no point could anybody overtake anybody, but they did the minimum amount of laps needed to be able to award half points. So it was effectively the qualifying order on Saturday is what they got points for, because you literally couldn't overtake, and they got half points for that when there was no opportunity for anybody to have lost or gained any positions. It was a very controversial one. 2021 was just a very controversial year, to be honest. Lewis and Max, after this massive dumpster fire of a season that could have been so good, they had some incredible moments of racing. It's just that, unfortunately, there was a lot of dirty driving going on, and there was a lot of showing very little respect. There was a lot of incidents where if it had been somebody other than Lewis that was in that situation, Max would have behaved very differently, potentially. But, you know, it's in the past. They went into the championship deciding final race at Abu Dhabi equal on points, 369.5 points apiece, which was, of course, very dramatic and great for the entertainment aspect. Lewis actually led the race for the majority of its 58 laps. Max qualified in pole, but Lewis got past him on turn 1 of lap 1. Some people argued that he went off track to do that, but the steward said that he didn't. And he ended up building a gap of over 17 seconds over Max Verstappen by the time Verstappen pitted, which he had a cheaper pit stop because he did it under a virtual safety car. So the gap would have actually been bigger. It's just because of the virtual safety car, which was due to Giovinazzi retiring from the race on lap 35. So that was great for Verstappen. So by the time Verstappen came out of the pits, the gap between them was 17 seconds. Verstappen then used his fresher tyres to reduce that gap down to 11 seconds, but he was not doing that at a rate that he would have been able to catch Lewis Hamilton before the end of the race. So at this point, it is looking like Lewis was on course for the win, and therefore he was going to win a record-breaking 8th World Championship. However, on lap 53 of 58, Nicholas Latifi crashed at turn 14, which brought out the safety car, because obviously they had to recover his car, they had to repair the barrier damage, all of that sort of thing. Verstappen then, under the safety car, pitted onto fresh, soft tyres, because he had enough of a gap to Carlos Sainz in P3 that he could pit onto new tyres, onto new soft tyres, and still come out in P2, so he wouldn't lose any track position by pitting. Whereas if Lewis was to pit and then Max didn't, Lewis would lose track position to Max coming out in P2, and then if the race, because of how close to the end of the race it was, if the race was to not restart, if they were to finish under the safety car, he would have then lost the race because he chose to pit. So Verstappen was in a very opportune situation there that Lewis was not in. So Hamilton stayed out on 40-lap-old hard tyres, and Verstappen is on brand new soft tyres, which are the fastest tyres. And Lewis has had very little life in them. They're the hard tyres, which are the slowest tyres anyway, and they're old. Like, his tyres were pretty much finished. He was just nursing them to the end of the race. All of the lapped drivers were initially told that they would not be allowed to overtake and unlap themselves. So that is against the standard procedure of a safety car race restart. The procedure of a safety car race restart is that every lapped car overtakes all of the cars that have lapped them, overtakes the safety car, and goes back round to join the lap that everyone else is on. So the message that that wasn't going to happen led everybody to believe that the race was not going to be restarted. So it led everyone to believe that the race was going to finish under the safety car. But then on lap 57, bear in mind this 58-lap race, so 57 and 58, that's all that's left. After pressure from the Red Bull team principal, Christian Horner, to get racing again, Michael Massey, the race director, gave the order that only the 5 cars between Hamilton and Verstappen would be allowed to unlap themselves. Not the rest of the lap cars, so not the cars that were in between Verstappen in P2 and Carlos Sainz in P3, just the cars between Lewis and Max, to bring Max up onto Lewis's gearbox. And immediately after Sebastian Vettel, who was the last of the 5 cars, passed the safety car to join the lead lap again, race control announced that the safety car would be entering the pits at the end of lap 57 to allow one final lap of green flag racing. That was met with fury by Mercedes team principal Toto Wolff, because that is not the standard procedure at all. That is not something that's in the rules, but there is clauses within the regulations that basically say that the race director could interpret things to his own way. It's these loopholes that I mentioned earlier. On the lead up to the final lap, Verstappen drove alongside Hamilton, even edging slightly ahead of him at one point, before dropping back in a move that has now also been outlawed during safety car restarts. So again, it benefited Max then, but you're not allowed to do it anymore. And on the final lap of the race, once they got racing again, Verstappen used his fresh, brand new soft tyres to pass Hamilton into turn 5 and take the lead of the race. And then he held off counterattacks from Hamilton as Hamilton desperately tried to take the win back on much older, much slower tyres. After 10 laps before, it was looking like a guaranteed win for him. And if this safety car period hadn't happened, if Nicholas Latifi hadn't crashed, Lewis would have won. Like, there's no two ways about it. Max was not going to have caught him. Sadly, Nicholas Latifi did actually get a lot of hate. It's not his fault that he crashed. he crashed. It is what it is. He isn't the person responsible for any of the calls that were made during that safety car period. All he did was crash his car. Like, he is nothing to do with this situation. He is just like the catalyst event. But he received a lot of hate, even receiving death threats, which is not nice at all, and is something that he spoke about after the winter break. Not nice. Not necessary, not nice. Michael Massey, who is responsible for this, also received a lot of hate. Again, not necessary, don't need to send the man hate. Equally, glad he's not in his job anymore. He was later replaced, and radios emerged. They did a whole investigation into this, and radios emerged from the final few laps of the race, where he appeared to be taking orders from Red Bull team manager Jonathan Wheatley, including using the exact same phrases when defending his actions on the radio to Toto Wolff as Jonathan Wheatley and Christian Horner used on the radio to him. It was all a little bit dodgy. So the FIA admitted that what happened in Abu Dhabi stemmed from human error. In their official report on the controversy, they admitted that. But they said they weren't going to do anything to overturn the race result. They weren't going to do anything to award Hamilton his 8th title, anything like that. Because equally, Max did drive a very good season. He also deserved to have won the championship. He just didn't deserve to have won that race. So in terms of that, Lewis should have won the championship. But Max did also have a very good season, you know? But the FIA said that the final standings are valid, final, and cannot now be changed. This caused massive scandal. It caused massive damage to the reputation of Formula One as a whole, and it also led to Lewis Hamilton taking some time away. We didn't hear from him after the race until February the next year. He did consider leaving F1 at that point. He did consider not coming back, and he didn't actually confirm that he would be returning to Formula One until February 2022, when he posted on Instagram on the 5th of February 2022, and probably on Twitter and stuff, like on his social medias. He posted saying, "I've been gone, now I'm back." He got knighted that year, literally the week after Abu Dhabi, so we saw photos of him getting knighted, but again, we heard nothing from him, literally from after the race, when he and his dad congratulated Max, did what he had to do at the track to be very, very gracious, and then silence, understandably so. Moving on to 2022. This was Lewis's first winless season in his F1 career. He was partnered with George Russell at Mercedes, and significant changes in the technical regulations that were seeking to utilise ground effect to generate downforce. Mercedes introduced a car concept that just didn't really work. They introduced the zero side pod concept at the Bahrain pre-season testing. It was significantly different to every other team's concept for these new regulations. And for the first half of the season, Lewis had to try lots of experimental car setups and aid in the development of the W13, that season's car. During the second half of the season, when he wasn't having to do this developmental work anymore, he performed much better. He scored more podiums and points than Russell, who hadn't been developing the car in the same way Lewis had in the first half of the season. And Russell had outscored Lewis in the first half of the season while Lewis was doing this developmental work. Lewis said to the team to get rid of this concept of zero side pods, and they didn't listen to him because George managed to win the Brazilian Grand Prix with Lewis very close behind in P2. So because they'd got this win with their concept, they stuck with it for the start of the 2023 season as well, until they finally listened to what Lewis had told them literally a year ago and got rid of it. During the 2022 season, he did still set some records, such as most consecutive seasons with at least one podium finish, most consecutive seasons with at least one lap led, most races with a single constructor, most Q3 appearances, most top 10 finishes, most finishes at the Monaco Grand Prix, most podiums at a single circuit, most points at Monza, and most podiums at the US Grand Prix. So he set lots of records in that season, even though he didn't manage to win any of the races. And by the end of the season, he achieved 9 podiums and finished in 6th place in the championship, 35 points behind Russell in 4th, despite qualifying on higher grid positions and scoring more podium finishes. Because of this developmental work he did at the start of the season, that was not a year that Lewis was competitive. 2023, the season just gone. Lewis said that they were not where they wanted to be at the start of the season. He ended up the first race of the year in Bahrain, finishing 5th, over 50 seconds behind Max in P1. The first podium of the season for him was in Australia, and he took his 104th pole and the first pole that he had since the 2021 season at the 2023 Hungarian Grand Prix, qualifying 0.003 seconds ahead of Verstappen. He also signed a 2-year contract to remain with Mercedes through to the end of the 2025 season, during which he will be 40. So despite that little moment in time where there was potentially going to be a retirement announcement or something, or just Lewis stepping away from the sport, he is still very much committed to racing in Formula One. He's very much committed to trying and to fight to get his 8th World Championship / 9th. He's also still pushing for things like having an F1 race in Africa, because we currently don't have one. They've raced in South Africa before, so he'd be very happy if F1 was to race in South Africa again. And he has actually said in interviews that he will not retire until it happens. He is very much committed to Formula One at the moment, which is great to see. He did finish the 2023 season 3rd in the championship, and the Mercedes was not worthy of that. It was not worthy of that this year. It was not a good car. So that kind of just shows how much he's able to extract out of the car, because Mercedes have kind of fallen off. But hopefully next year they'll be back on, you know? So far in his career, he has had 332 race starts. He's got 7 championships, joint record with Michael Schumacher. So that's 2008, 2014, 15, 17, 18, 19 and 20. 103 wins, 197 podiums, 104 pole positions, 65 fastest laps. He is regarded as one of the most complete drivers on the grid, with an aggressive driving style and a natural aptitude for identifying the limits of a car. He's very, very, very good at tyre management and fuel management. He is praised for his consistency. From 2017 to 2018, he finished 33 consecutive races in points positions, a streak that was actually ended by mechanical issues rather than driver error, and he is regarded as one of the best wet weather drivers in the sport. For example, at the 2008 British Grand Prix, bearing in mind this is his 2nd season in Formula One, he beat 2nd place Nick Heidfeld by over a minute. He was over a minute ahead of his closest competitor, the largest margin since the 1995 Australian Grand Prix. Ayrton Senna was an absolute hero of his. He was also a major influence on his driving style. And in 2015, David Coulthard actually called Lewis the Ayrton Senna of his era. And Lewis is actually now an honorary citizen of Brazil as well. As of 2022, he was made a citizen of Brazil. However, throughout his career, as I mentioned, throughout his childhood, Lewis has been subject to a lot of racial abuse, particularly from Spanish fans. For example, at the 2007 Chinese Grand Prix, some Spanish fans that had travelled there were quite racist towards him. The 2008 Spanish Grand Prix fans went in blackface and said that they were Hamilton's family. There was a Spanish website that the name of which translates to English as Burst Hamilton's Tyre. That was ahead of the 2008 Brazilian Grand Prix. It was a website where users could basically leave sharp objects like nails and porcupines around the Interlagos circuit for Lewis to run over. The FIA actually had to step in and warn Spanish authorities about the repetition of this racist behaviour, and they launched a Race Against Racism campaign. And as I mentioned earlier, following the 2021 British Grand Prix, he received a lot of racist abuse. Throughout 2021, he received a lot of racist abuse from Max Verstappen fans as well, which was not acceptable. Former world champion Nelson Piquet, who also happens to be Max Verstappen's girlfriend's father. Nelson Piquet has actually been in trouble with the law in Brazil for making both racist and homophobic comments about Hamilton, including referring to him as the N-word. So there's still a lot of rubbish that Lewis has to deal with that he really shouldn't have to deal with. But to combat racism and to encourage more diversity in motorsport, he actually launched the Hamilton Commission in June 2020. It was in development since December 2019 with the Royal Academy of Engineering to help find ways in which motorsport can engage more young people from underprivileged black backgrounds within science, technology, engineering and maths, and ultimately then employ them in motorsport or other engineering sectors. And then he also launched Mission 44 in July 2021, building on recommendations of the Hamilton Commission. It's a charitable foundation created to help young people from underrepresented backgrounds achieve their ambitions in wider society, and he pledged £20 million of his own money, of his personal wealth, to support the work of the charity, and that works in conjunction with a joint charitable foundation between himself and the Mercedes F1 team called Ignite, which focuses on increasing diversity within motorsport by improving educational opportunities and offering financial support. He's also very passionate about environmental issues and animal rights, and follows a plant-based diet, and he has done for years and years and years. And in September 2020, he launched Team X44 to compete in the Extreme E electric off-road SUV racing series from 2021 onwards. So he's done an incredible amount both on and off the track, and I think he is an inspirational person, to be quite honest. And this has been a very long episode. I do apologise for that. Actually, no, I don't. I hope you've enjoyed it though, because I really just wanted to cover everything about Lewis that I could. I grew up loving him, and yeah, it's been lovely being able to talk to you about him. So if you have enjoyed this episode, please do like, rate, subscribe, all of that. Comment if you're on something that you can comment on, you know. I will see you in a couple of days for an episode about Toto Wolff. And then we'll have more driver profiles next week, as well as another F1 for Beginners episode. So thank you very much for listening, and I will see you in a couple of days. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed. Bye!